February 28, 2026. That is the date Operation Epic Fury began. That is also the date the world's most important shipping corridor, a 21-mile wide strip of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, effectively stopped working. The Strait of Hormuz. 20% of every barrel of oil traded on the planet passes through it. Before the conflict, roughly 138 vessels transited daily. Within weeks of the fighting starting, that number collapsed to almost nothing. Tankers sat at anchor. Insurers pulled coverage. Shipping firms rerouted or stopped moving cargo entirely. The economic bleeding reached billions of dollars every single week. And the United States Navy, 2 carrier strike groups, Aegis destroyers, the most lethal naval force ever assembled, could not reopen it. Not because they weren't fighting, they were. They destroyed Iranian vessels by the dozen. They neutralized submarines, missile sites, coastal defense infrastructure. By mid-March, CENTCOM's own battle damage assessments counted over 120 Iranian naval vessels destroyed or disabled. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, stood at a Pentagon podium and declared that U.S. forces were rapidly depleting Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation, and still the strait stayed closed. So here's the question this video is going to answer. Not the political one, not the strategic one. The engineering one. Why did the most advanced naval force in human history have to call in a 50-year-old airplane, one the Air Force had been desperately trying to retire, to solve a problem that $40 billion worth of modern warships could not? The answer is not simple. But it is logical. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The problem isn't the strait, it's what's inside it. Most people picture the Strait of Hormuz as a wide open body of water. It isn't. The navigable shipping lane, the actual corridor where tankers must transit under international maritime law, measures just 6 nautical miles across. 2 miles inbound, 2 miles outbound, 2 miles of buffer between them. That is the entire operational space. Everything outside that corridor sits in Iranian territorial waters, which means any vessel operating there becomes a legal and diplomatic problem before it becomes a military one. Now picture what Iran has placed inside and around that corridor. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is a force entirely separate from Iran's conventional navy, and it is purpose-built for asymmetric operations in confined waters. It operates over 1,500 fast-attack watercraft, not frigates, not corvettes, speedboats, fiberglass and composite hulls, most weighing under 15 tons, capable of hitting 50 to 70 knots, with some of their newest platforms, the Hadar 110 class, reportedly exceeding 100 knots. They sit low in the water, generate minimal radar cross-section, and they move between civilian fishing vessels, cargo dhows, and commercial traffic in a way that makes positive target identification a nightmare. Each one carries weapons, anti-ship missiles, rocket launchers bolted to gunnels, heavy machine guns, and their operational doctrine is built around one idea: swarm. 30, 40, 50 boats, all directions simultaneously. The goal is not to destroy a warship in the first pass. The goal is to overwhelm its sensors, saturate its defensive systems, and force a catastrophic math problem. Because here is what the IRGC understands about modern naval warfare that most people do not: overwhelm. Every missile a destroyer fires costs more than every boat it is aimed at. This is about costs. An SM-6 interceptor, the Aegis destroyer's primary surface engagement weapon, costs approximately $5.3 million per round. An IRGC fast attack craft costs somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000. That is a cost exchange ratio of more than 100 to 1 in Iran's favor. And a destroyer's vertical launch system holds 96 cells. Cells are already committed to Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 area defense interceptors, and ESSM quad packs for air defense. You cannot spend your vertical launch system cells on speedboats, not if you still need them for Mach 3 anti-ship missiles coming over the horizon. The IRGC did not invent this concept spontaneously. They studied it. Specifically, they studied the 2002 Millennium Challenge war game, a Pentagon exercise in which a retired Marine Lieutenant General commanding a fictional asymmetric force used exactly this kind of swarm boat doctrine to sink 16 American warships in the opening phase of a simulated Persian Gulf conflict. The Pentagon restarted the exercise under different rules. Iran took notes on the original result: simulation. Their entire maritime strategy for the Strait of Hormuz is built on that simulation, but they built it for a scenario where the U.S. Navy fights alone. Why the carrier air wing couldn't solve it. This is the part that surprises people. The Carrier Strike Group has aircraft. Good ones. The FA-18E Super Hornet is one of the most capable multi-role fighters ever built. It carries precision weapons, it can reach targets hundreds of miles away, and it costs around $30,000 per flight hour to operate. But put it over the Strait of Hormuz on a fast attack boat hunting mission, and something fundamental breaks down. At combat cruise speed, 500 knots or more, an FA-18E crosses the entire 6-mile shipping corridor in under 40 seconds. Every vessel on the surface of that water exists in the pilot's field of view for less than 2 seconds. At that speed, distinguishing an IRGC gunboat from a Kuwaiti fishing dhow among dozens of civilian craft isn't just hard. It's operationally impossible without a sensor lock that takes time to establish. Time the geometry of the engagement does not provide. Speed, in this environment, is a liability. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter is a different story. It cruises slowly, it can loiter, and it carries Hellfire missiles suited for maritime interdiction. But the Seahawk was designed primarily for anti-submarine warfare. It carries 4 to 8 Hellfires per sortie, depending on configuration. It needs to return to the ship after roughly 90 minutes on station. And it is vulnerable to the kind of 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine gun fire that saturates the littoral combat environment around Hormuz. Without armored protection, flying low over contested water puts the crew at serious risk. The Seahawk is a scalpel, and a scalpel is not the right tool when the problem involves 50 simultaneous targets moving at 70 knots in 6 miles of contested water. So the carrier aircraft is too fast, the helicopter is too light, the destroyer's missiles are too expensive, and the VLS cells are too strategically valuable to spend on composite-hulled speedboats. That is not a list of bad weapons. It is a mismatch. A fundamental mismatch between the threat environment and the tools available to address it. Every platform in the Carrier Strike Group's arsenal was engineered for blue water warfare, open ocean, high-value targets, long-range precision engagement. The Strait of Hormuz is a brown water problem, a 6-mile corridor, cheap targets, fast threats, civilian traffic everywhere. The Navy brought precision surgery to a bar fight. The phone call they had to make on March 19, 2026, General Dan Kane stood at a Pentagon press conference and said something that stopped defense analysts mid-sentence. He said that the A-10 Warthog was now in the fight across the southern flank and was hunting and killing fast attack watercraft in the Strait of Hormuz. The A-10 Thunderbolt II is an aircraft that was designed in the 1960s and the 1970s to destroy Soviet tank columns on the plains of Europe. Air Force leadership had been trying to retire it for more than a decade. The service wanted to eliminate it entirely by fiscal year 2026. That was until Congress blocked the plan in the National Defense Authorization Act and mandated a minimum fleet of 103 aircraft through September 2026. Top Pentagon officials had called the aircraft redundant, obsolete, and unsuited for modern warfare. Then it was suddenly described as hunting and killing in one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Why? Because the A-10 Thunderbolt II is not fast. In the Strait of Hormuz, that is the most valuable thing it has. The engineering logic. The A-10 was not designed around a set of mission requirements. It was designed around a gun. The GAU-8A Avenger cannon came first. Fairchild Republic built the aircraft around it. That 7-barrel Gatling system fires 30mm rounds, depleted uranium penetrators at the armor-piercing end, at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute, 65 rounds per second. The aircraft carries over 1,100 rounds in a drum, roughly the size of a small car. At the standard 2-second firing burst, the pilot delivers 130 rounds downrange. Cost per depleted uranium round is approximately $137. Cost to kill an IRGC fast attack craft with the GAU-8A is under $10,000. Cost to kill the same target with an SM-6 interceptor is $5.3 million. That is a 500-to-1 cost exchange ratio shift in America's favor, not an improvement. A categorical reversal of the economic logic Iran built its entire swarm doctrine upon. But the gun is only one part of the equation. The A-10 carries 11 hardpoints and up to 16,000 pounds of ordnance. In Operation Epic Fury, CENTCOM released imagery confirming the Warthogs flying with loadouts that included AGM-65 Maverick infrared-guided missiles for medium-range maritime targets, APKWS-2 laser-guided rockets, precision guidance kits fitted onto standard 70mm Hydra rockets, $35,000 per shot, and AIM-9M sidewinders for self-defense against Iranian one-way attack drones. That is a weapons mix specifically calibrated for the literal combat environment, cheap precision for small boats, infrared-guided standoff for vessels at 12 nautical miles, and anti-drone capability against the same Shahed-class systems Iran has used to harass shipping across the region. Now consider the physics. The A-10's operational cruise speed over the strait is around 300 knots. When an FA-18E crosses the same corridor, a surface target is in the pilot's field of view for under 2 seconds. At 300 knots, the A-10 pilot gets 3 to 5 times that window. Enough time to visually identify the target, confirm the military hardware, rocket launchers, military paint, tactical positioning, and engage. The pilot is not reading sensor feeds on a heads-down display. The pilot is looking through the canopy and making a human judgment call. In a shipping lane, shared with thousands of civilian vessels, that matters enormously. Target discrimination, the ability to positively identify a hostile asset and distinguish it from civilian traffic before pulling the trigger, is not a secondary concern. It is the primary constraint on the entire operation. Get it wrong, and you have an international incident. The A-10's low speed and low altitude turns that constraint into a manageable problem. The aircraft's straight wings, not swept like the F-35 or the F-18, generate lift more efficiently at low speeds, burn less fuel, and create a tighter turn radius. In a 6-mile corridor, that last point matters enormously. The Warthog can bank, reverse, and re-enter its patrol loop without leaving the engagement zone. It stays on station for up to 2.5 hours on internal fuel plus external tanks, flying racetrack patterns, persistent armed overwatch, an aircraft overhead every hour of every day, making every IRGC boat commander wonder whether that sound they hear is the last thing they will hear. And if fire comes back from the 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns mounted on IRGC positions along the Iranian coastline, the A-10 absorbs it. The pilot sits inside a titanium-armored tub weighing over 1,200 pounds. the only cockpit in the American inventory specifically engineered to withstand direct fire from armor-piercing rounds and fragmentation. The aircraft carries redundant flight control systems and manual reversion capability, a mechanical backup that bypasses every hydraulic and electronic system. In 2003 over Baghdad, Captain Kim Campbell of the 75th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron lost all hydraulic flight control and flew home on those mechanical cables alone. She landed. The aircraft was repaired. She flew again. An FA-18 faced with the same ground fire environment over Hormuz avoids the threat by climbing. And in climbing, it loses the ability to see what it came to kill. The Warthog descends and keeps shooting. The layered answer Iran didn't plan for. Iran's swarm doctrine was not designed against the A-10. It was designed against Aegis destroyers fighting alone. When General Kane confirmed the Warthogs were in the fight, he also confirmed something else. AH-64 Apaches had joined the southern flank. Army aviation assets staging from expeditionary sea bases, floating forward operating bases that let Army helicopters operate from Navy platforms, were now hunting IRGC fast attack craft below the A-10s. Three branches of the United States military, operating simultaneously over a single 6-mile corridor. Each filling the gap the others could not. At 3,000 feet, A-10's flying racetrack patterns handled fast attack craft and coastal missile positions with GAU-8A and APKWS. Operating cost, $19,000 per flight hour. At 200 feet, AH-64 Apaches hunted the boats that slipped through, each carrying up to 16 Hellfire missiles and a 30mm M230 chain gun. Same caliber as the Warthog, different mechanism, equally lethal against unarmored hulls. On the surface and at altitude, Aegis destroyers and littoral combat ships maintained air defense coverage, directed energy systems against drone swarms, and deployed mine-clearing assets. Their SM-6 inventory was reserved for the threats that actually require it: anti-ship ballistic missiles, supersonic cruise missiles, and Mach 3 threats that nothing else in the formation could stop. Before this combined arms architecture, the Navy was firing $5.3 million missiles at $50,000 boats and watching its VLS cells disappear. After it, the Warthog handled the fast attack problem for $10,000 per engagement. The Apache handled the close-in threat for $70,000 to $200,000. And the destroyer's vertical launch system stayed full for the fights that actually demanded it. The math flips entirely. Iran built a doctrine to bankrupt American missile stocks. The A-10 made that doctrine mathematically irrelevant. What the numbers show. By the time General Kane made his March 19th announcement, U.S. forces had already destroyed over 120 Iranian naval vessels and 44 mine-laying craft since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper stated publicly that U.S. forces had destroyed more than 100 Iranian naval vessels and would continue to rapidly deplete Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation. The A-10's role in those numbers is not incidental. The War Zone, Defense One, Air and Space Forces magazine, and The Aviationist all confirmed that Warthogs had been flying combat air patrols over CENTCOM airspace, with loadouts specifically configured for maritime interdiction operations. The aircraft had also been conducting 9-second gun runs, unusually long bursts compared to standard 2-second engagements. That was a sign that targets required sustained engagement rather than quick passes. And the fleet was growing. Reports emerged that 18 additional A-10 aircraft had landed at RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, nearly doubling the Warthog presence in the theater. The Air Force had also been training for this exact scenario for years. In September 2023, two A-10 aircraft engaged simulated surface threats in the Gulf of Oman, alongside the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Stetham. In early February 2026, just weeks before Operation Epic Fury began, the Air Force and Navy released imagery of A-10 aircraft conducting close air support training with the littoral combat ship USS Santa Barbara in the Persian Gulf. It was a dress rehearsal for exactly what was now happening in combat. The Warthog did not stumble into this fight. It was prepared for it. The Air Force just had not wanted to admit that preparation mattered. The retirement debate just got complicated. Here is the institutional irony at the center of this entire story. The Air Force has been trying to retire the A-10 since at least 2014. Leadership argued that its low speed and lack of stealth made it irrelevant against near-peer adversaries, that modern integrated air defense systems would make it too vulnerable to survive, and that the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter could absorb its close air support mission while also performing air superiority and strike roles. They called it a single mission platform built for one thing and limited in every other dimension. Congress disagreed, repeatedly. Year after year, lawmakers blocked or slowed the retirement plans, citing the Warthog's unique combination of loiter time, survivability, and low operating cost that no other aircraft in the inventory could match. In December 2025, the National Defense Authorization Act again blocked plans to retire 102 of the remaining 162 aircraft, mandating a floor of 103 operational A-10s through September 2026. And then Operation Epic Fury happened. Dan Grazier of the Stimson Center said the longer the A-10 exists, the more impressed I am with that aircraft, speaking to Defense One after the Hormuz deployments were confirmed. Defense analysts across the spectrum were saying variations of the same thing. The aircraft that could not survive in a modern threat environment was currently proving irreplaceable in one of the most contested maritime corridors on the planet. The specific threat environment around Hormuz, primarily man-pads shoulder-fired missiles at this stage of the conflict, rather than advanced surface-to-air missile systems, sits within the band of risk the A-10 was built to absorb. Its titanium-armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and manual reversion flight controls are not theoretical survivability features. They are operational ones, tested in combat over decades, and now relevant again over brown water in the Persian Gulf. One senior defense analyst told a British outlet that nothing else in the inventory can loiter over a swarm of fast attack craft and pick them off with the same surgical, low-cost lethality. That statement, made in 2026 about a 1970s design, is either the greatest argument for keeping the Warthog alive or the greatest indictment of what replaced it. Possibly both. The question nobody wants to answer. Congress currently prevents the Air Force from retiring A-10s below 103 aircraft through September 2026. The transition plan for 2027 through 2029 remains open. The 74th and 75th Fighter Squadrons at Moody Air Force Base are already replacing their Warthogs with F-35s. The 124th Air Wing began retiring A-10s to the Boneyard at Davis-Monthan in May 2025. The average age of the fleet at the start of the current conflict was over 43 years. The aircraft is leaving. The only real question is whether it leaves before someone figures out what replaces it. The MQ-9 Reaper can be adapted for maritime interdiction. It has the loiter time, and it can carry Hellfires, but it cannot absorb ground fire. A single 12.7mm round that would leave a Warthog flyable can take down an unmanned aircraft entirely. The Reaper's survivability in a contested littoral combat environment where MANPADS and heavy machine guns are everywhere, is a genuine open question. Loitering munitions, drone swarms carrying 30mm cannons or equivalent, represent a future capability. But future is the operative word. Nothing currently in the American inventory combines the A-10's loiter time, weapons capacity, survivability, visual target discrimination capability, and cost per engagement at the low end of the threat spectrum. Loiter and cost remain unmatched, and the low end of the threat spectrum, cheap, fast, numerous, asymmetric, is exactly where adversaries like the IRGC have chosen to fight. The equation. This is not a story about nostalgia. It is not about keeping old aircraft because people love them, or because the sound of a GAU-8A firing, that distinctive low-register mechanical roar that takes about a second to reach your ears after the rounds are already downrange, is one of the most immediately recognizable sounds in modern warfare. It is about engineering logic. The Strait of Hormuz posed a specific problem, a confined brown water environment. 1,500 small composite-hulled fast-attack watercraft. A cost-exchange ratio that made conventional naval engagement economically ruinous. And 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply sitting behind the blockade. The A-10 Thunderbolt II solved that specific problem because its design characteristics, low speed, long loiter time, high ordnance capacity, armored survivability, visual target acquisition capability, and per engagement cost measured in thousands rather than millions, were precisely matched to the threat geometry. Not because it is the most advanced aircraft in the American arsenal, because it is the right one for this fight. The Pentagon spent a decade arguing that the Warthog was a single-mission Cold War relic unsuited for the modern battlefield. Operation Epic Fury did not disprove that argument. It simply clarified something the retirement advocates had missed. The modern battlefield is not only the one they planned for. It is also 6 miles wide, filled with speedboats, and worth $40 billion a week in stranded oil. And in that battlefield, the right tool wins, not the expensive one. If this analysis changed how you see the relationship between weapons design and threat geometry, the channel goes deep on exactly these questions every week. Subscribe. And drop Warthog in the comments if you think a 50-year-old airframe just made the strongest argument for its own survival. So here's the question worth arguing about in the comments. Should the A-10 be retired on schedule, or should it be upgraded? Or should a new, more advanced version be built? Drop your answer below. The debate down there is usually better than the video. We do not worship the machine. We worship the equation. See you in the next one.